Hello, welcome to the BeEngaged podcast, where we talk to brilliant minds, elevate discussion, all in an effort to promote unity in this world across all industries. Now, today, I'm partnering with the World Affairs Council of Orange County, and we have retired Admiral Rogers on. This is a big one. This is a big one, guys. So thank you for joining the podcast.
I wouldn't say that, Michelle. I wouldn't say that.
So as I'm partnering with World Affairs, we'll go over some of the content there. But before I do that, I want to talk about your background. Tell us your background. You were in the national agencies and cyber command. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, so I was head of the National Security Agency, which is the largest intelligence organization in the U.S. government. And at the same time, I was the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, which is one of the 11 combatant commanders, the senior warfighters, if you will, within the Department of Defense.
And as you got into that, what made you, did you ever, I have little kids, I have 3 kids, and I actually got this question from the young ones about, did you know that you were going to be where you are? Did you know that you were going to be here? Did you know? And I kept telling them, no, I had no idea where I was going to be as I grew older. What got you into that position? What started you down the path of even going into this field?
Well, so first of all, I always knew I wanted to be a naval officer. I literally told my parents when I was in the 6th grade, about 11 years old, because I read stories of the sea and I just loved them. And I told my parents when I was about 11, hey, I know exactly what I want to do in life. I'm going to be a naval officer. I'm going to drive ships for a living. And I started moving down that path. I was successful in becoming a naval officer. I drove ships for the first 6 years or so. And then I transitioned into a specialized field of intelligence, which then ultimately kind of morphed into a very cyber-focused area within the Department of Defense and its broader mission. And I found myself being given positions of increased responsibility. They were very kind to me, kept promoting me. But did I ever think that I was going to be the head of the largest intel organization? No, because nobody with my background had ever done that in the history of the Navy. And did I ever think I was going to be the lead cyber warrior, so to speak, for the Department of Defense? No, I didn't. I was just very fortunate. It's a combination of I ended up working for people who believed in me and were willing to give me chances and didn't allow my background to define me. They allowed my performance to define me. So I was very fortunate in that regard. And then never underestimate the importance of timing. My skill set, cyber intelligence, became increasingly important, and my timing was very good.
Yeah. So the percentage-wise, if you had to say percentage-wise between skill and luck, and let's just go with those two, skill and luck, what percentage do you think it takes to get to those top positions that you were at?
Well, look, you have to have skill. They're not going to make you one of the senior most leaders of the largest military in the world if you don't have skills. So it does take skills, and it's not so much luck, it's fortune to me. Luck comes across to me as it's purely by chance, as opposed to fortune to me is about, hey, you're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And that really was the biggest, in some ways, a big driver for me. But it all boils down to, look, I worked with great people who were willing to give me opportunities, and they were very adamant that they weren't going to define me by my background, so to speak. They were going to define me by my performance, and they kept giving me opportunities that my background, some might have said, oh, he's not really qualified. He's not a great choice by that. But the people I worked for, who I was very fortunate, were among the senior most leaders, both civilian and military in the department, they clearly kept telling me, hey, we're willing to challenge you, Mike. If you can keep performing, we're willing to keep challenging you.
And remind me, you mentioned it last night at the event, but what administrations did you work for again?
So I worked for President Obama. I worked for the last 2 years of his second term. And then I worked for President Trump for the first 2.5 years of his first administration. So I spent 4.5 years in the jobs. I worked for 2 different presidents.
So not that many people have
very similar individuals. They, were very alike in personality.
Different personality. So what is that like, working for the top leaders of essentially the world? What is that like? Is it scary? Is it, hey, they're just people? Tell us a little bit about what that experience is like.
I mean, trust me, it can be intimidating. There's times you ask yourself, why am I alone in the Oval Office with the President of the United States? Or, how am I sitting here as we're discussing how the nation is going to respond to an event in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan? On the other hand, I did it for 37 years, and the journey prepares you for that level of responsibility. And so as you're executing it, while there are times you'll step back and say, this is really bizarre that I that I'm part of all of this. You've been prepared for this for decades. And so I never felt like I was out of balance or shouldn't have been there, or I just felt like I had been trained and I was ready. So I was very fortunate.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. So Admiral Rogers, so now that you are retired, not necessarily retired, but now what are you doing with your time?
So I do tell people, look, I didn't really retire. I just transitioned. So what I wanted to do was transition to something that, number one, I didn't want to work for a single company because I wanted control of my time. That was the most important thing to me, not money. It was control of time. I wanted to do the things I wanted to do with some measure of flexibility. If I want to spend some time with my wife today, I'm going to spend some time with my wife today. If I want to travel a little bit, I'm going to travel a little bit. So I built a portfolio of things, and that portfolio is built around three core things: cybersecurity, geopolitics, and technology. And I do that through a variety of a couple dimensions to it. I love the international aspect of my previous life. I worked all over the world. I wanted to keep doing that. So I do bounce all over the world now. I joined us here in LA from Tel Aviv. Another week, I'll be in Davos for the World Economic Forum. I like bouncing around, whether it's China, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, etc. I also like the idea of being around people who are younger at a different stage of their journey in life, getting their perspective on things. So I teach at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management's MBA program, and executive ed program, which I really love. I speak. I do media globally. I'm on a handful of board of directors or advisory boards. I work with individual companies, and I do some venture capital stuff to try to identify companies that might have potential, again, within tech, geopolitics, and cyber.
Yeah, great. So as we're partnering with the World Affairs Council of Orange County, shout out to the president, Jane. She connected us. So last night you talked a little bit about cyber.
Director of the National Security Agency.
And the Cyber Command, COCOMs, that really are at the forefront. And you talked about some heating up politically, some cyber stuff heating up. How is that going in your perspective?
Say that last part again. I want to make sure I understood it, Michelle.
The cyber, the heating up of cyber. Last night you talked about.
Right.
There was a question about how many times are we actually getting...
it was attacked was the phrase that was
used. Yeah, unauthorized access. And it was, you said 100,000 a day or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we are not deterring our enemies we're not deterring others from attempting to penetrate our networks for a variety of very bad purposes. We're just not shaping their behavior. We are not causing them to stop and say, boy, should I really do this? Because the price of potentially doing it might be very painful or very high for me. So I would give us very low grades in that. We just have not been able to shape the behavior of either nation states or criminal groups. I think we need to spend more time asking ourselves, why is that? And what do we need to do differently? Because try to do more of the same and thinking you're going to get a different result, I think has a really low probability of success in my experience.
Yeah. And last night we talked about the difference between virtual and physical, but this disinformation, misinformation, and divisiveness is rolling over into physical.
For example, hey, if this is true, which I accept based on what I'm reading and hearing, which is a very sad comment to me, hey, this justifies my taking the law into my own hands. This justifies me taking extreme measures in both rhetoric and some forms of physical violence. That's not good for us as a nation. And that has nothing to do with what you believe or don't believe. Violence is not a good thing, and believing that any one of us is above the rule of law, that's a bad thing for us as a nation.
Yeah, especially when it comes to physical. So the disinformation, the trying to bifurcate our folks, that's not illegal. Information warfare is not illegal because it's free speech and disinformation.
We all have the right to read what we want and believe what we want.
Yeah,
but
and
I think the flip side is we all have to get used to the idea that we now live in a world in which technology enables a lot of people to manipulate information, manipulate images, manipulate viewpoints, and to present information in a factually incorrect and highly emotional manner. And we've all got to learn to say, stop. Just because I saw something doesn't mean it's true. Just because I read something doesn't mean it's accurate. We've all got to learn to become a bit more skeptical based on what we're seeing and reading.
Recently had some professors on from UCI, and I'm interested in how are we going to unite? I really want to get to how are we going to unite? Their input was education, critical thinking. How do you think, we're going more and more in a direction where the platforms are saying, yeah, you can put anything you want on there. It could be, disinformation. It can be, conspiracy theories. And so it's going more and more in that direction where the divisiveness is going to stay. How do we get to uniting each other? What's your thoughts on that?
So for me, I think there's three components to a strategy. Number one, I do believe there is a responsibility and governance piece here, that in terms of what role does the government play in enforcing responsibility for those who own the platforms. I am not one who believes, well, I have no responsibility as the host of a social media platform. I have no responsibility to address content accuracy or accuracy of identity. Hey, that's not my job. I reject that premise. I do believe that if you're going to host, you do have a level of responsibility to ensure that the accuracy of identity, is this the person who they really say they are? Because one of the Russians' techniques is they love to assume the identity of individuals who think, well, if this message comes from an American of a particular background or orientation, if that's what's the perception, hey, it'll be much more effective than if the perception is, hey, this is a Russian who's telling you to do this. So I do think that the content hosts have a responsibility. I'd like to see that become more formal in some ways. Then I do think that there's potentially a technological aspect to this. Hey, how can technology help us identify manipulation of images, manipulation of informations, falsehoods, etc.? And then lastly, there's a societal role here for all of us. We've all got to become a bit more skeptical in the sense of we got to stop believing everything you see and hear is, oh, this must automatically be truthful. It must automatically be accurate. Rather, hey, I'm seeing this one input. How can I confirm this? What do I get from other sources? Hey, what are the perspective of others here? We've got to become much better critical and discerning thinkers.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so talking about technology advances and technology trends in cyber, what are you seeing now that you're transitioning into the commercial world and you have a view of the world? What are
I tend to bounce all over. So
technology trends?
And you're going to see a handful of really significant disruptive ones. I mean, we tend to focus on AI, but I would argue quantum, nanotechnologies, blockchain, 3D. I mean, there's a host of technologies that are fundamentally changing some of our economic models. That is both positive and a challenge. It's positive in the sense that it helps engender great economic growth. There's a challenge in the sense that it challenges the status quo and it puts pressure on the workforce. And some jobs that traditionally had been driven by human activity potentially are now going to be done through the application of technology. I mean, that's one of the big issues around AI, particularly if you are into content generation. Look, you saw that play out, for example, here in LA and Hollywood in the writer's strike, where one of the issues was, look, we as writers, as creators, are concerned that companies are going to start using this technology to create independently via machine and no longer need humans to do some of this. Hey, that concerns us. That really attacks our basic working model. We want to ensure the long-term viability of our membership and of the human element within the creative process. So, there are pressures we're going to be going through. There's no doubt about that. I wish I could tell you that there wasn't going to be any pain associated with all this amazing technology, but there will be a fair level of pain.
Yeah, I thought on the positive side, from last night, when you were talking about a lot of in the entertainment, but as well as all of our other industries, we are not interconnected in many cases. This is a little bit different than the technology trends that you were talking about, but we're not connected in our voting systems. We're not connected.
Right, we're talking about voting. We're talking about the power system. The fact that we don't have one single integrated nationwide capability means to disrupt those capabilities on a nationwide basis becomes more difficult.
Yeah,
which is good for us. We don't
great.
want those capabilities disrupted on a nationwide basis.
Because we're all about interconnecting everything, and it's like, well, being disconnected, and it's actually going to benefit us quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Unintentional benefit. The system wasn't designed with the view of security in mind, but the way we've done it does help us a little bit.
Okay, well, where are you going after this? What's your next plans? You're heading up to Burbank, I hear.
Heading up to Burbank in Hollywood today to do a little work, and then I'll catch a flight home, and then I'm, knock on wood, I'm home for about 5 days, and then I'll do some work at home. I'll head down to DC to do a little work as well, and then the following week I head to Switzerland for the World Economic Forum in Davos.
So retirement isn't for you?
No, I love hard work. I like pushing myself. I love learning. I love growing. I love interacting with people. And when, part of it is, look, I come from a very working class family in Chicago. My parents, neither of them went to college. They lived in Chicago their entire lives. They were public school graduates. They as I said, they didn't go to college. My father worked 4 jobs when I was a kid growing up. He was one of the hardest working guys I ever met. I really love and respect my father. He worked so hard to build a better life for his family so his children could go to college and be given opportunities that he potentially wasn't able to. And his father, my grandfather, when I was alive, was a coal miner in Wales. I can remember
Wow.
as a little boy talking to my grandfather about what was life like in the village pit in the mine and what led him to leave Wales in 1925 and get on that ship down in Cardiff and pass by the Statue of Liberty and wind up in Ellis Island. Grandfather, what was that like? What made you decide to leave everything you knew to create a new life for yourself and your family? He was 19 when he came to the United States, and he had dropped out of school. He had almost finished high school, but he had been working in the mine for 5 years, and his brother and his father also worked. His older brother worked in the pit, and his father had worked in the pit. And his father, my great-grandfather, had told the family, there's no life here for us. We're going to die of black lung by the time we're 50. This isn't a way to live. So they came to the United States. So I grew up around hardworking people who always were trying to work hard to create a better life for themselves, but for the next generation. And I just wanted to do the same.
I think that's a little bit of America's story. My background, my ancestors came over from Europe. We came into Missouri, Kansas. We were one of the first settlers in Nebraska. And they said, hey, here's an ox, here's a wagon, here's land. 180 acres, figure it out. And that is hard work being, you have a lot of kids. Now I understand why they had so many kids. They basically had to figure it out. And that hard work is being a story, or as reading an article where that's in your DNA. That gets transferred to your trauma, gets transferred, but so does just your ancestors get transferred into your DNA. Because I'm the same way. I really enjoy working.
Yeah, I have to admit, my grandfather, my father always used to tell me, you need to embrace the idea that work has a value in and of itself, regardless of what it produces. That the idea that you're going to push yourself, you're going to challenge yourself, and it will bring out the best in you. And that's irregardless of what it actually generates or produces. So I bought into that lock, stock, and barrel. I used to kid people, look, there's a lot of people in the American military that are much smarter than me. But there aren't going to be many people in the military who are going to outwork me. It's just the world I was raised in.
Yeah, I think that also goes for art. So, with AI, art is important. And I feel the same way. Creating art, whether it results in anything or not, is still worthwhile to create it. That's another form of work. But art, to me, is work. And creating something is, into the world. And whether, it's financially beneficial or not, it's still goodness into the world. And that's
you have to admit, I have great respect for people who have that creativity ability. That just blows me away. The ability to see and then produce images, and whether it's music, whether it's painting, etc. It's amazing. The discipline and the creativity that takes, I'm always blown away.
It comes from inside.
I have a youngest son who is particularly creative, who's a fashion design person. And just watching him be able to visualize and think and then just put it all in writing, it just blows me away. I'm like, I could never do that.
Yeah. And it's kind of bearing your soul. It's interesting how, because I've never been on the artistic side until I started the podcast. It's always been in me. I've just never really leaned into it. But it comes from inside. And again, with this is really going deep, but that comes from your ancestors too. That DNA that comes from that hard work and from everywhere they have been.
Yeah, we're all part of an environment that raised us,
So, well, sir, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time and taking.
No, thank you, Michelle.
This has been, and last night again at that World Affairs Council. So I just really appreciate you taking the time and continuing to educate as you're transitioned into your new role. I want to try to get your message out and educating the next generation, essentially.
Yeah, look, we're all trying to understand the complexity in the world around us. We're all trying to figure out, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for our society? What does it mean for the broader world around us? And how can we deal with it in the best possible way? The thing I hope we all remember is, look, there's room in this world for lots of different viewpoints. My father always used to remind me, Michael, if you can't live in a world in which other people think differently than you're going to be very frustrated. So, always try to remember, you're going to have people with different perspectives. The only thing is, can we take those different perspectives? Can we find a middle ground? Or can we keep moving forward? Can we keep working hard to make the world around us, to make America, to make our society better, stronger, more inclusive, that it's looking out for its citizens? Look, I'm very proud of America. It's not perfect, but I think it's the greatest nation in the world.
Fantastic. Admiral Rogers, thank you for your time. And
thanks, Michelle.
There's a lot of fires going on in LA right now. Be safe as you go up there, okay?
I will. Thanks. You have a great day.
Okay. Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining the Be Engaged podcast. This podcast was prepared by the author in her personal capacity. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the author and do not reflect the official policy, opinion, or position of her employer. Thank you again for joining. All rights reserved to Be Engaged.